Taking the peace proposals at their word for a moment, both Washington's 28-point draft and the European counterpaper are trying to stop a hideous war. That matters, but they risk treating peace as a purely mechanical problem of lines on maps, troop ceilings, and phased sanctions relief. Peace without justice isn't peace. It's a pause, a bargain with memory, and a set of incentives for the next round of cruelty. So the US plan, what does it actually contain? It asks Ukraine to surrender major territory, accept a permanent bar on NATO membership, and cap its army. It also folds in a de facto amnesty by requiring Kyiv to drop legal claims and by signalling reintegration of Russia into global economic and diplomatic life. Now, the European counter-proposal modifies some military and security points, such as making the troop cap apply only in peacetime and at a higher level, and it pushes back on some territorial language. Yet, on accountability, it is still oddly thin. The mood music in both texts is stop the shooting first, sort out the responsibility later, and do not let prosecutions get in the way of a deal. That instinct is understandable. It's also morally and strategically mistaken, particularly when there is evidence of so many prisoners of war, so many Ukrainian prisoners of war, being shot by Russians. Consider the single recent example, the deep state and the multiple Ukrainian prosecutors report video evidence of Russian troops executing 5 bound or pro-Ukrainian prisoners of war. That's just one example. Ukraine is already investigating hundreds of such executions. Under the Geneva Conventions, executing prisoners of war is a textbook war crime. There are no grey areas. When a peace plan floats blanket amnesty in the same week that bandaged, surrendered men are shot on the ground, it is not neutral pragmatism, it is an invitation to continue. Butcher supplies the wider context. Survivors there are not asking for vengeance, they're asking for the world to keep faith with the idea that murder, torture, rape and forced disappearance are not negotiable side issues. The Associated Press reporting from Butcher is saturated with that point. Amnesty feels to victims like legalizing the atrocity after the fact, and they are right to fear it. If we teach armies that atrocities are a bargaining chip, we should not be amazed when atrocities become routine. Now to a crucial distinction, justice here is not the medieval notion of punishing a nation. Collective guilt is both immoral and self-defeating. It breeds permanent hostility, and it lets the real authors of crime hide behind the mass. The target must be individuals, not ethnicities or passports. So, of course, Russia must be brought back into the global community. But the individuals responsible must be held responsible. International law already thinks about that in this way. The crime of aggression is about leaders who plan and launch the war. War crimes and crimes against humanity are about those who order, enable or commit atrocities in the field. The Council of Europe Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression is being built precisely to prosecute senior Russian political and military figures for the decision to invade, with the aim of becoming operational in 2026. The ICC has already issued warrants for high-ranking Russian officials, including over child deportations, and domestic courts across Europe are opening cases under universal jurisdiction. These are not utopian gestures, they are the architecture of a future in which law restrains power. So, the right posture is double-tracked. Track 1, reintegration of Russia as a state. The war will end only when Russia can live in the rules-based international order again. That means trade, diplomacy, scientific exchange, cultural contact, and a path away from siege mentalities. The US draft explicitly aims at gradual reintegration, even a possible return to the G8. Europeans also speak of resumed Russia-NATO dialogue after a deal. Fine. But reintegration must be conditional on behaviour and on cooperation with justice mechanisms. You do not rebuild a house by pretending the arsonist was a weather event. Track 2, the prosecution of individuals. Peace negotiators should clearly say that there will be no blanket amnesty for grave breaches. That is not merely moral rhetoric, it is the settled direction of international law. Amnesties for systematic killing, torture and unlawful deportation are incompatible with the duty to prosecute. The Council of Europe's own human rights machinery and the Register of Damage for Ukraine are already structured on that assumption. Reparations, Memorialization, truth-telling, and institutional guarantees of non-recurrence only make sense if linked to proper accountability. Here is the political point the plans are overlooking. Accountability is not a decorative flourish after the ceasefire, it's a tool for reaching a ceasefire that lasts. If Russian commanders and soldiers know that surrendering POWs and shooting them will lead to indictments in Kyiv, The Hague or Berlin, they have a reason to restrain themselves. If they know that the world will trade amnesty for quiet, they have a reason to escalate. Deterrence is not only about missiles, it's about courts. This also speaks to the theological frame. Just peace theory rightly wants reconciliation, repair, and a positive peace. But if it loses sight of sin, coercion, and the reality of deliberate evil, it drifts into fantasy. The Ukrainian war shows why jus post bellum has to be integrated into any settlement, not as revenge, but as moral order. A peace built on forgetting is a fragile truce. A peace built on truth has a spine. So, what should negotiations insert now while pens are still hovering? Well, first, explicit language about any peace agreement does not and cannot extinguish liability for war crimes, crimes against humanity or aggression. The parties can end hostilities, they cannot legislate away the Geneva Conventions. Second, a commitment by Russia to cooperate with the Special Tribunal and the ICC, including access to suspects and evidence, not immediately perhaps, but by staged benchmarks tied to sanctions relief and reintegration. Third, a robust prisoner and deported children protocol that treats unlawful transfers and POW abuse as central peace items, not humanitarian add-ons. The US plan already includes prisoner exchanges and child return language, but it is too vague and the credibility comes from enforcement. Fourth, resources for Ukrainian courts and investigators. Most of the caseload will remain national because that is how international criminal law actually works. The proposals that exist at the moment are vague, I think, because they don't want to be this explicit. We can build a bridge back to Russia, the state, but we must build a dock for the Russian criminals. One is diplomacy, the other is law. Confuse them, and you get neither justice nor peace. Keep them distinct, and you get the only peace worth having, one that tells Butcher and the executed prisoners that their lives mattered enough for the world to remember and to judge.